So in honor of the snow day that I have home from school here in Texas, wearing my totally awesome penguin beanie that I got from my bestest bestie for Christmas. Thanks, KK. Today's discussion will be about bacteria. I'm going to start off talking about Staphylococcus aureus, Streptococcus pyogenes, and Staphylococcus epidermidis. I kind of group these together because they do a lot of the same things. They mostly have to do with skin infections, though they do have a couple other things that we'll talk about. So, Staphylococcus aureus probably gets a lot of attention because of MRSA. If you've heard of MRSA, it means methicillin-resistant Staph aureus. It's become a big problem because these bacteria have developed resistance to the drugs that we commonly use to treat them. Staph aureus can sometimes be known as the grapes of death. You'll have to excuse me, my printer's running low on ink, so this should be purple, but they are, as the name says, they're cocci, they're coccus, Staphylococcus. So they're in little clusters of usually purple balls. They stain purple when you gram stain them. Staph aureus, if it's grown on a blood agar plate, it will exhibit beta hemolytic properties, which means that you'll kind of see these like yellowish rings around them on the blood agar, and the blood agar plates are made from like a sheep's blood kind of thing. Anyway, they are a pyogenic bacteria, which means that they produce pus. And if you listen to Streptococcus pyogenes, they're also pus producing. So that's kind of part of why I grouped them together. Staph aureus is a coagulase positive, which coagulase is one of the invasive enzymes that it produces, and it's one of the reasons, it's part of what gives it its unique characteristics and makes it easy to identify, or at least easier to identify. What coagulase does is it kind of forms a clot around where the bacterial infection is, and that offers some protection to the bacteria against your host defenses. So, one of the first things that we'll talk about is impetigo. A lot of people have heard of it. Kids get it a lot. When I was looking up pictures online to try to show you, here's impetigo. They kept giving me pictures of Amy Winehouse and what was going on her face. I don't know if she's got impetigo. I'm not a doctor. It's most common in children. I kind of think maybe she's got some herpes face going on. But this is impetigo. It's a pretty common skin infection in children. One of the other things that Staph aureus is known for is folliculitis. That's just an infection of the hair follicles, so the bacteria gets in and it starts producing pus, and you get this. Pretty icky, I know. So, men, don't shave your backsides, okay? Because a lot of times what happens is this, and I would much rather see some hair on your booty than this. Because believe me, most of the pictures that I found when I was trying to look for stuff to show you were men's backsides. With this. Yuck. Some of the other things, these are where we're going to get into where you can distinguish a little bit more is the furuncles, the carbuncles, and the abscesses. They're hard, filled with pus, and that's kind of how you can tell that it's Staph aureus and not a different type of skin infection. But this is an example of a furuncle. Pretty icky. He got like an infection, maybe started out as folliculitis and then progressed. The next thing what will usually happen is if he, she, whatever, the person has more than one furuncle, you're going to end up with a carbuncle. I don't know if you can see that really well. And they're pretty common on the nape of the neck. A lot of times if somebody has some sort of lowered immune system, or maybe they're not washing real well back there, or they're not shaving well, or they did shave and they got a little infection, that can happen. One of the, this one's pretty icky. You ready for this? This is a photograph of a subcutaneous abscess. It started out, it was a Staphylococcus aureus infection, and this particular Staph aureus happens to be of the MRSA strain, and the different strains come from the plasmids when the bacteria replicate. A lot of times they have these special, it's DNA that's not within their chromosome, and that will give it a lot of its virulence factors. But this, credit to the CDC, is a picture of a Staph aureus, a MRSA Staph aureus infection. Yuck. So, there's a couple other things that Staph aureus does It is one of the main food poisoning bacteria, and part of how it's so dangerous is it's not the bacteria itself, it's the enterotoxins that are released. Entero means, fix your tummy. They don't change the taste of the food, they don't change the color of the food, so you really don't have any good way of knowing that your food is contaminated. And luckily for me, I don't eat a lot of the foods that get contaminated with this, like mayonnaise or salad dressing or any of that kind of icky stuff, so I'm generally safe from Staphylococcus aureus food poisoning. But it does happen. Staph aureus is also the bacteria that's responsible for toxic shock syndrome, which despite, okay, it's not caused by tampons. When the super absorbent tampons were introduced onto the market, it's related to them. What happens is they kind of change what's going on in that area, and they make it more readily available for the bacteria to colonize there. And what happens is the bacteria, they release toxins, and it's the toxins that actually cause the problem. And a lot of times there's a rash that goes along with it. And staph toxic shock syndrome is not only for females, and it's not only for women of childbearing age that use tampons. So don't think that just because somebody's presenting with this type of rash or anything like that, that they can't have toxic shock syndrome if they're male or they're a child. Another one of the things that Staph aureus causes is scalded skin syndrome. It basically, it looks like your skin has been burned, and sometimes it starts to like flake off. It can also be in bone and joint infections. A lot of times those sort of things happen when there's been a type of surgery, especially if there's been like a metal device implanted. And part of that is because these bacteria can produce biofilms. Sorry, I'm kind of twitchy if I'm all over the place. So the biofilms, I don't know, have you ever felt like your teeth feel slimy? Staph aureus doesn't do that, but it's the same principle where they kind of release this film that it's almost like a slimy capsule that protects them, so they can survive in conditions where they normally wouldn't. Or if you use some type of antiseptic agent, it might not kill them because they have this biofilm protecting them. It is also the number one cause of septicemia and bacteremia. There we go, stumbling on my words again, right? So that's something that you really want to be cognizant of when somebody presents with these signs and symptoms of a septicemia. More than likely, it's going to be Staphylococcus aureus, but it could also be Staphylococcus epidermidis, which is it's part of your normal flora. It's the number one bacteria you have. It's all over your skin, but that's a good thing because what it does is it actually helps prevent other bacteria from colonizing on your skin or causing infections. So we want to keep our Staphylococcus epidermidis here, but it can easily get into the blood and become a true pathogen. So even though it helps us most of the time, sometimes it can hurt us. It's also gram-positive. It is coagulase negative though. So if you have something that shows up coagulase positive, Staph aureus. Everything else could be anything else. That's about it for Staphylococcus epidermidis and Staph aureus. I'm not going to go into all the details of the virulence factors and stuff. There's a ton in all the lab ID, whatnot, but it's a pretty important one, and that's kind of why I started with it. Plus, it's got some really cool pictures, as you see. Icky. So, Streptococcus pyogenes is another pus-producing bacteria. It is also gram-positive. It's in chains instead of clusters, so they just kind of line up next to each other. And it's also pyogenic. It's also beta hemolytic, so gets those yellow colors when you grow it on blood agar. It also, in case you forgot, causes impetigo. It can cause cellulitis, which is like a deep skin infection. Here, sorry, some of my pictures aren't so good because, like I said, my printer's running low on ink. But this is somebody's shoulder, and they have cellulitis, and you can see in here some of the pus starting to form. And if you compare this to like a carbuncle, you can see that this is much softer than the carbuncle, which has the hard particles in it. Another thing that the Streptococcus pyogenes can cause is erysipelas. That's right. If you listen to the prefix "era," most of that has to do like erythrocytes, red. So try to think along those lines. It's a skin rash that develops. It's an acute. Comes from the bacterial infection, so you get that on your skin, and it's scarlet fever. Have you ever heard of scarlet fever? Scarlet fever is caused by Streptococcus pyogenes, and this specific Streptococcus pyogenes that I'm talking about is the group A type. It's group B type. We'll talk about that when we start talking about pneumonia and meningitis and stuff. But for right now, we're talking about group A. Scarlet fever. If somebody's ever had scarlet fever and they get it again, a lot of times they're not going to develop the rash where their skin gets all red. Scarlet fever. Get it? Okay. One of the most fascinating things in the Streptococcus pyogenes group A is, have you ever heard of necrotizing fasciitis? It's pretty cool. I mean, it's scary because it can develop really, really fast. It's acute, it's toxic, it's rapid, it's necrotic, invasive. It's going to kill your skin, and you're probably going to lose a limb. Here's a picture of Streptococcus pyogenes. And what happens with necrotizing fasciitis is you get usually a cut. Sometimes, okay. Have you ever been to Florida? I used to live in Florida. We don't swim in the canals in Florida. You know why? Because there's a lot of gross stuff in there. This bacteria that can cause necrotizing fasciitis is found all over the place. It's in nature. It's generally not a big deal because it's found in such low numbers. But people that do things like swim in canals, I don't know why anybody would ever do that, often get it. And people, sometimes if they're swimming in the ocean and they get cut by barnacles and stuff. So here's a picture, and this is what your skin should normally look like. When the infection occurs, this is what happens to your skin. I'm going to show you a picture. Watch out now. This is necrotizing fasciitis. If you can see, a lot of the skin had to be cut away. So if somebody presents with this, which it can start within a matter of hours, you can start having deep tissue that you have to cut away, that the bacteria, it's releasing all these toxins. You have to treat it aggressively with antibiotics, and you have to debride the skin, you got to cut it off, and a lot of times these people lose fingers, toes, entire limbs. This person right here, they're going to be scarred for life. This is like their entire trunk got covered with the necrotizing fasciitis. So, yuck. Another member of this group is what causes strep throat. Everybody's heard of strep throat, right? It's actually only accounts for about 20% of the throat cultures, and it's usually only in people that are aged 5 to 15, but if you work with young kids, a lot of times you can get strep throat. It incubates in your throat for about 2 to 4 days, and it really will run its course in like 3 to 5 days, so even if you don't give somebody antibiotics for strep throat, a lot of times it'll clear up within a few days. The problem with strep throat isn't the strep throat itself, it's what happens after you have strep throat and the bacteria is dead and all these toxins and pieces of the cell wall and everything are floating throughout your body. A lot of times what will happen is the antigens that are released from the cell and the antibodies that your body has produced to combat it will form these complexes, and they kind of evoke an autoimmune reaction. So I don't know if you've ever heard of rheumatic fever, but that is one of the complications, and these antibody-antigen complexes attack cardiac tissue, and that's really bad. We need our hearts. Big hearts. There we go. It can also cause acute glomerulonephritis, which is, it's attacking the kidneys. So again, very, very bad. We need our kidneys, we need our hearts. So, and it's not, again, it's not the bacteria itself, it's the antigens and the pieces. So if you're trying to do like a culture or anything like that from their blood, you're not going to find it. You actually have to find the original site of infection, and by this point in time, it's cleared up in the throat, so it's going to be gone. That's why we treat so readily with antibiotics if somebody presents with strep throat. So, I hope that was helpful. Oh, one more thing. It also has hyaluronic capsule, which will help protect it from attack by the immune system. The little capsule keeps the bacteria all safe inside. Not good for us, but good for the bacteria. So those are some key points about these bacteria that tend to infect your dermis, your epidermis, your da-da-da-da. So, all right, stay tuned. Next, we're probably going to talk about the bacteria that tend to infect your gut. So we're going to talk about some cholera and stuff like that. And I promise I won't show any pictures of what kind of damage those guys do.